radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening, Fade to Black. How you doing? How you doing? That's right. I've been telling you all week what is going on tonight. It is Thursday, September 19th, 2024. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Don Schmitt is back with us. One of my favorite people on planet Earth. Everybody knows that. And tonight, we're going to discuss, I've framed it. I mean, it's dumb. We can do whatever we want. But, you know, the Roswell mystery. And I wanted to do this show. I reached out to Don and to put this together because over the last year and certainly over the last couple of months, I've heard Roswell mentioned more than I have like ever. And it's right there. And so it was an opportunity for Don and I just to sit down and have a conversation about Roswell, any new developments, and of course, what's going on in and around our UFO community, and of course, his world too as well. So we're going to be doing all of that tonight. We all know that he is a best-selling author, and he's the former co-director of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, where he served as director of special investigations for over a decade. Now, he has authored many books on the UFO subject, and of course, Roswell, including, going back to 1991, and we will talk about this tonight on the show. One of the books that kind of changed it for everything, and UFO Crash at Roswell, of course, and how things immediately changed in 1991 because of his great work. And with all of that, I don't want to waste any time. I'm just going to say good evening, Don. You look amazing.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate it, and I always enjoy being with you, no matter what the circumstances, where we happen to be, and what trouble we I try to get into. So.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I mean, hey Don, I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit with the audience, and I'm gonna start here. Don, everybody, is 70 years old. 70 years old, and Don. And so I was thinking about this as I was going to get my espresso, right? So, and I was thinking about this. When you and I met, you weren't 60 and I wasn't 50. You were in your 50s and I was in my 40s. Mm-hmm. Where'd the time go, man?
I know.
Holy crap, man. And you look exactly the same.
Well, you do.
Exactly.
You do too. It helps when we do have our own hair. I don't think there's anything that at least to the individual creates the impression of aging more than a
good head of hair
of follicle growth on the cranium. But do you remember you and I were sitting one time and you were signing books and I was sitting next to you messing with you, and when people I was spelling a lot of names wrong because of you, so
yeah, and I was telling everybody that you had a new line of hair care products.
Yes. Something to do with goat milk or something. I don't remember, something like that, right?
It was so funny. I think there was more interest in that than your new book.
Isn't that?
Yeah, and that's kind of how it goes. But here's the trippy thing, and I know that you heard my intro.
Roswell is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. And
And you know who actually said that almost 20 years ago? It was Larry King, the late Larry King. And
Okay.
I've been on his show on 3 different occasions. And that's exactly how Larry put it. He said that, that Roswell comes back stronger and stronger and stronger. And, for the best efforts of the government, to dispel and sweep this out of the historic venue once and for all. And it continues to demonstrate that the truth, as we would like to believe it, it continues to resurface. It continues to have a life of its own, because you're not going to squelch the truth forever. I mean, you may bury it, you may disguise it, you may distract, from, people seeing, like the old, switch of hand as far as the old shell game, that type of thing. And emphasize the point that the government is up to 4 official explanations regarding Roswell. That in itself is a clear demonstration they're not winning the game, because they have to keep coming up with a new excuse to demonstrate their own failures in, maintaining, the secrecy of something this big. And so I'm not only gratified, but I'm also very disheartened at times, disappointed, and that we would always use that term, as even our dear friend, late Stanton Friedman. We're racing with the Undertaker. And just imagine if this whole disclosure, situation would have happened 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when at the time we were working with the late Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico. And we had 100 firsthand witnesses. In other words, we had 100 potential whistleblowers who could have gone before a congressional committee investigating this subject, and they could have said, I held it in my hands and it wasn't from here. And so I look at it and I go, well, how convenient that we waited till the very last one was gone. And okay, now let's open it up. Now let's see if we can get to the bottom of all this. And so for me, especially for me personally, it's more of a personal devotion and commitment to all those eyewitnesses, all those people who were brave enough to go on the public record, to state beyond a shadow of a doubt that it did happen. It was not from here. And now I'm going to finish this. I'm going to take this into the end zone and have them smiling down at me and saying, we got one thing right. And that was entrusting it to you to finish it. And that's what I've devoted my life to.
Yeah, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And I'll say it right now. I'll say it at the end of the show too as well. But thank you for your commitment to this subject. You have never let your foot off the gas, and mad respect for that.
Thank you.
You've taken your share of hits as well along the way, but anyway, so just thank you for that. I want to go back and visit a couple of things. I was talking to Christina Gomez yesterday, and we were talking about I was referring some stuff to her, and I said I went back this week, and I enjoy doing this, Don, going back and watching old documentaries. Okay. The new stuff is great. I make them, right? Okay. So yeah, the new stuff is great. Right. I get it. But I enjoy going back and taking that history lesson for a couple of reasons, to see how things have changed. Correct. Right. And the ideas and how things have evolved, but also the missing nuggets that that were fresh back then, but over time they kind of fade away a little bit, right? Okay. So so I did that, and I watched last week, since I just got back from Alaska, I watched like 4 documentaries, and it was interesting for me to see and hear 4 different takes on Roswell.
Yes.
And that and so one of the things that is stuck out, and I did this partially because you were coming on the show, right? I got to be in game shape. Yeah, I got to be in game shape. But one of the things that was mentioned, and it was different in each one of them, but that there were 3 bodies recovered on Mac Brazel's ranch. And I went, now, wait a minute here. Okay, so let's address that first, because a lot has been put on that over the years. And there's one other twist to this. There's been a lot put on that over the years, and then the exposure of the actual crash site where there was a skip
site, as we call it.
Yeah,
right.
It was a skip at the Brazel.
No, it wasn't. I still don't know who came up with that word, but if we go back to the original military witness, Major Jesse Marcel, who was head of intelligence of the 509 Bomb Wing, the first atomic bomb squadron in the world, he stated over and over again when they first arrived at the site that because the debris covered an area of almost a mile long, that this clearly was a mid-air explosion. Something attacks on the ground, it may break up a little bit. It's not going to scatter debris for a mile. In other words, this rained debris from some altitude. And I'm going right back to the original source, the fact that it was good enough that Major Marcel, that they quickly concluded that this was a mid-air explosion. I have no idea where this word skip ever came from. I really don't.
So let me back up. I have stated a lot over the years that going back to Long John Nebel, the 1956 documentary UFO, there's no mention there of Roswell.
No.
Long John Nebel, who had everybody on his show, Kenneth Arnold and Donald Kehoe, all the players, right? All the players.
Absolutely, all the players at that time.
No mention of Roswell.
No.
None. And so nothing in any books that I found. But then something strange happened to me about a month ago. So I dusted off some of my older books, Ruppelt's book, and
flying objects, right?
Yep. And I'm lying in bed, and there's a line in the book. The book was written in 1952, 53. All right. Anyway, there's a line on one of the pages. It's a throwaway line. But the line said, and nobody has ever mentioned this before, including myself. But the line says, and then there was an FBI memo about a crash in Aztec, New Mexico. That one line. And I went, wait, what? In 1947. That's the line. And I thought to myself, there it is. Right, it's right there. The cover-up was nearly complete, right? But that got out. But even that was ignored by Nebel and Kehoe and others over the years. But it was there in print in 1953, and I had never seen it before. But I caught it last month.
We have to, consider the situation at the time, and for having to date interviewed over 600 witnesses, either directly or indirectly involved. And to hear one after the other of the first-hand witnesses, and then down to their families, how they were threatened, how they were intimidated, the oaths of secrecy that the men took. And most of them would take this to their graves. The idea that Major Marcel, who essentially became the patsy, those famous pictures that he's posed behind the weather balloon and the radar reflector kite in General Roger Ramey's office in Fort Worth. And those pictures, hit the wire service and, went worldwide as to explain away Roswell. Well, he had to live with that. He had to live with the fact that the lead intelligence officer in the United States military couldn't tell the difference between off-the-shelf balloon material that a 5-year-old would have recognized and something manufactured off the planet. So, but he did that all with the assurance that the truth would all come out someday. Now, I want to point something out that I seldom hear anyone else mention. And that's the fact that Marcel, he's ordered by General Ramey to pose for these pictures. It was a press conference. They were going to show the media the pieces of the flying saucer just arrived from Roswell. Hallway of reporters, and General Ramey would only allow one reporter into his office. And that was James B. Johnson of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. They had worked with him before. He felt he could trust him. He takes the 2 pictures of Marcel, and then first, Marcel is sworn to secrecy. He wasn't sworn to secrecy. He didn't take any security oath when it was still a flying saucer. He is sworn to secrecy after it's been explained away as a weather balloon. He's ordered by Ramey not to say a word to any of the reporters, not to even mention a word of this to his wife once he would get back to Roswell, which would not be until the next evening because they kept him incognito. They kept him overnight in Fort Worth. So I would ask any one of your listeners, any one of your viewers, explain, why is Marcel first told to shut up after the balloon explanation? I never hear anybody bring that up.
Yeah, it's a very important point. And for the audience, here's a little refresher, and I refer to this all the time. Here's a portion of one of the most important parts of the Hout press release. Okay, and it reads as follows, and this is verbatim. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chavez County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. And that was released by the Associated Press on July 8th, 1947.
Correct.
And it's so important to mention. I was talking about this earlier today with Christina Gomez. At that time, in 1947, the state of New Mexico was the most secret place on planet Earth.
Correct. It's amazing how often when I lecture on college campuses, and especially the faculty is present, and I pose the question, where was the first atomic bomb detonated? And it's amazing how many of these learned professors, well, of course, Japan. No. How about Trinity Site, 2 hours west of Roswell in 1945, New Mexico? And they're shocked. It's like they never heard of Oppenheimer. They never heard of Enola Gay. They never heard of General Leslie Groves. They never heard of Fermi or Lytle or any of the other scientists who were involved. And okay, so we set that premise, and now you're going to get a history lesson. So now I hope you're going to listen, because you're talking about the first squadron who was in charge of the atomic bomb. It was a composite unit where they selected the best officers, the best pilots, crew, doctors, nurses. If you swept a broom on that base back in 1947, it was because you were the best sweeper in the entire U.S. military. You all had a top security clearance for the atomic bomb. And what truly then stretches credulity is the fact that the very balloon that would become the second explanation, that would then stand for almost the next 50 years,
Right.
was the very balloon that the 509 bomb wing used every day in their bomb drop exercises. As they would, train and practice, they weren't using bomb casings. They were using sand barrels of equivalent weight and size. But nonetheless, they would launch these Rowan radar target balloons from atop the bank building in downtown Roswell, from above the 7th floor, and they would get their upper atmospheric wind readings and speed and pressure and things. What helped them, in these training exercises. Nobody was more familiar with these balloons than the personnel at Roswell. There are pictures of them with the balloons. There are pictures in the yearbook of the balloons hanging from the rafters in one of the hangars at the base at that time. And that's the ultimate irony, that the people who were most familiar with the balloons were the ones that became the scapegoats, the ones that, you couldn't recognize your own balloons? Well, the point is, because it's not what we recovered. That's not what came down out in that desert north of Roswell back at that time. It was something altogether different. And that's why it remained a secret all those years until, and you know the story, that 30 years later, Jesse Marcel, a retired lieutenant colonel, was diagnosed with terminal emphysema. And he realized, for all the broken promises, that the truth would come out someday and he would be vindicated, he'd be exonerated, he'd be a hero, that type of thing. He realized they're not coming out with the truth. So he did. And that's when he went public. And that's when he made the statement, and I always love this quote, being familiar with all materials, both foreign and domestic. This was nothing made on this earth, end quote. You don't get any more direct, any more profound than that. Wasn't made on this earth. It wasn't, we considered that. We thought it might be. No, it wasn't. He had 30 years to consider and contemplate and weigh, all the alternatives, all the possibilities. So by the time he's been diagnosed with a terminal disease, he sets the record straight. He goes public. It wasn't from this earth.
Now, the other part to this, which today it's like scares the crap out of me when I think about the ginormity of the implications, which is this.
Mm-hmm.
After the initial press release, and that goes out, and the Roswell Daily Record, and we all know about that, every reporter in the country had tickets for Roswell.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Every car was on the freeway.
Correct.
Right. Every train seat was booked. Right. Everybody was swarming on Roswell. And the next day, when they deflated the story with the balloon, right? You like that pun? You like that?
Yes, I got it. Yeah,
I did that for you. Next day, all of that action turned around.
Correct.
Everybody turned around. Nobody arrived in Roswell.
It worked.
And it worked.
It worked.
We were hours away.
Yes.
From the craziest situation ever in the history of mankind, and the government was successful in diverting the media. We were that close.
We were that close. And again, in being able to demonstrate the timeline, the chronology. And for those who still would argue that even the press release that was dictated to the public information officer, First Lieutenant Walter Hott, by the very base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. Give you a little, background of Blanchard. He would have been number 2 pilot on Boxcar, the atomic bomb over Nagasaki. They pulled him from that flight, and it was then Colonel Chuck Sweeney who piloted the plane. They felt the mission was too dangerous. That's my opinion. they had bigger plans for Blanchard. Blanchard would go on to become a 4-star general by the age of 50. That's unheard of. That's unheard of. That's how great he was. So he in no way suffered any reprimand or, as far as repercussions or any, as far as suspicions as to his, capabilities as an officer at that time. But,
and to your point, him and Walter Haut,
right?
The Enola Gay was stationed
at Roswell. As well as Boxcar.
Right. These guys are not idiots.
No.
And the secrecy and the buttoning down, loose lips sink ships, right?
Right.
All that was the mentality back then, right after World War II. Did not talk, and so that press release was crafted.
Yes.
Dotted, crossed, and perfected. There was no way that they were going to release something that was inaccurate or off target. Period.
And we've discussed this before, and I love the fact that, and even the use of the word, that this was crafted. It was scripted. And the reason we even know that is the fact that when the ranch foreman, W.W. Brazel, first reported the debris field, not to the military, but rather to the Sheriff George Wilcox. And then he, in turn, notified the base. It was Major Marcel who even picked up the phone. He would retrieve a box of the wreckage, take it back to the base with him, and who does he go directly to? The very base commander. So it continues to go up in importance as the minutes are passing. Why would you even alert the very base commander over mundane, off-the-shelf materials of any sort?
Yeah. You're not going to. And look, this is just so fundamental. But Marcel is not going to walk in a box of balloon stuff. He's not going to do it.
No. And on top of it, Jimmy, it's a 4th of July holiday weekend. I could show you exactly where Blanchard lived on the base back at that time. That brick ranch house is still there. And the fact that he would bother him on a holiday weekend when most of the base personnel are home on leave with their families, nothing is being tested, nothing is reported missing, no one is looking for anything, and then this happens. So the big question obviously becomes, what in God's name does this represent? And Blanchard would go on to say that at first they thought it had to be Russian because it clearly wasn't of American design. But the moment they started to handle this wreckage, they realized, heaven help us if it is Russian, because it was that superior. It was that advanced. And so, and then the next move that Blanchard would make, he sends out not a couple of enlisted men, a couple of grunts to check this out. He sends Marcel and the head of counterintelligence, Captain Sheridan Cabot, in the event it's something foreign, because that would be his specialty. And so he sends out his 2 lead intelligence officers to go check this out. There again, another disconnect. It isn't standard protocol. It's suggesting that they are quickly and urgently trying to seek out answers. And at the moment, they don't have any. Now Blanchard, going up the chain of command, he immediately would call up his boss, who was the head of the 8th Air Force stationed at Fort Worth. And that was General Roger Ramey. Now, Ramey was not available because, like as I had mentioned, many of the officers, he was home in Denton, Texas, with his family over the 4th of July. So he spoke to his underling. He spoke to his chief aide, his assistant, Colonel Thomas DeBose, who he also interviewed, who also signed his sworn affidavit to the balloon hoax, as he called it. And DeBose immediately contacts the Pentagon. This is all on Sunday, July 6th. Within minutes, DuBose receives a phone call from General Clements McMullen, who was Deputy Director of Strategic Air Command, ordering him to contact Blanchard and have the wreckage immediately flown to Washington. Washington has wreckage in hand by late evening, Sunday, July 6th. When does the press release go out? As you and I both know, at noon on Tuesday, July 8th. They had a whole day to put this together. They took a high-risk gamble as to whether the press would accept this. But the first thing they did was they switched all the attention away from Roswell, because where would it have been the most obvious place to have the press conference but in Roswell? But they shifted it to Fort Worth, General Ramey's office. Blanchard announces he's going on leave after a holiday weekend, which you don't do if you're in the military because you get docked, you lose that time. As opposed to if you take it in conjunction with the holiday, you don't lose those as extra days. So that made no sense. Marcel, as it mentions in the press release, he's flying the wreckage to higher headquarters, which happened to be 8th Air Force at Fort Worth. So he's unavailable. And where's the rancher? He's kidnapped by the military. He's nabbed while he's in Roswell, where the one radio station, KGFL, they quickly nabbed him to get an exclusive. They hid him out at the radio station owner's home. That was Walt Whitmore Sr. And they did a wire recording. They got him on wire recording, even describing the bodies that he witnessed on the ranch. And Brazo is abducted. The wire recording is confiscated by the military, and the radio station would then receive a threatening phone call from a T.J. Slowey, who was assistant director of the FCC in Washington, threatening them that if they broadcasted one further word about the incident, they would lose their license within 24 hours. Can you imagine that happening today? The FCC contacting you or anyone within the media, you're going to be jailed, or you're going to lose your license within a day if you say something about this or that. No. But that's how they shut this down in Roswell. So again, the way they contrived this whole situation, and they were playing also quickly off of the fact that it's post-World War II and the military walks on water. They were national heroes. They were worldwide heroes. And if they said, we made a mistake, this is what it actually was, who would question that? Who was going to then, raise any concern that there was a cover-up? In fact, that term cover-up wasn't even in the vernacular back then, because we so wanted to continue the afterglow of World War II.
Oh, we lost you. Don, we lost you. Okay. If you can hear me. Yeah, if you can hear me, Don, reset and come back. See, this is I don't freak out anymore. Don, reset and come back. This is the man running interference. Okay, let me see what I can do on my end. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And Don, I need you to hit me back. I can text him, but just when it was getting to that point, right? Just when it was getting to that point. So when Don comes back, I'm going to ask him a few different questions about possibilities. Okay, we got you back.
Yes.
Don, see, that's the man. That's the man right there. I don't get upset anymore. You talk about sensitive stuff like this, and that's what don't tell anybody that you kicked a cable. Let's just keep the
I don't believe I kicked anything.
Yeah, let's keep the conspiracy part up.
let me run down a few different scenarios. You've
Please.
done enough research on this that you've formulated opinions and theories. So I'm going to throw some stuff out at you. Is there a possibility that the craft was shot down by us?
No. And the reason I say that is that we've been able to document through the Stallion Weather Network that very evening that there was indeed a severe lightning storm that came off of the southern Capitan Mountains between 11 and 11:30.
Okay. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
So let's stay on this other part. What do you make of researchers out there that say that we intentionally shot the craft down in Roswell and that there was more than one?
No basis in fact. I mean,
No basis in fact.
No. There are no eyewitnesses to that effect. I don't think they wouldn't. We have never so much as came across a single witness who could come up with any cause, any reason as to why this craft essentially disintegrated, why it broke up. Whether it was a storm, whether it was radar. These are people just throwing up platitudes as far as, well, I believe this or I believe that.
Okay. What about it colliding with one of our aircraft?
No. There again, 4th of July holiday weekend, nothing was up in the air at that time. And certainly, I know there was even the theory at one time that it collided with a mogul balloon. Well, you can't even put a mogul balloon in that county at the time.
I haven't heard that one.
Oh yes, that came out before the collision of the UFO and one of our own aircraft at that time. Now, granted, as you had mentioned at the beginning of the program, that Roswell was the hotbed of military testing, and there were more bases in New Mexico at that time between Roswell and Cannon and Kirtland and White Sands and Holloman, and so yes. But let me say personally, what we're looking into more and more, and we had a CIA, former retired CIA radar expert suggest that what we need to look into is that because radar was in its infancy back then, and all of the military facilities at that time, they were only able to track incoming aircraft. The exception was White Sands, and that was able to track both incoming as well as departing. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were doing all the rocket testing of the captured German V-2s after the war. And so they had what would be considered the most sophisticated radar and the most powerful radar system in the world probably at that time. And so, as I had mentioned, all the bases, Roswell, Cannon, Kirtland, Alamogordo. There were also radar facilities in Vaughn, which is just 95 miles to the northwest of Roswell. And there was another one in just west of Socorro, New Mexico, which would place it directly north of the White Sands Proving Grounds, which was the rocket launch path at that time. So it made sense that they'd have radar also tracking it incoming. Okay, fine. What we found interesting was the fact that when you look at the radar lobes, the circular lobes, and where they all converged, it happened to be Lincoln County where this crash took place. And what this CIA engineer suggested was that, Don, what you need to do is historically go back and find out what the radar frequencies were, because they were totally unregulated at that time, that they were all over the board. And as a result, there was no one who was taking into consideration that as they would intersect, as they would overlap, that it may have created as far as interference to the point that, as we've discovered, that when pilots would fly their aircraft over Lincoln County, they would develop all types of instrument interference. So one of the new theories, one of the new suggestions is that maybe this somehow very fatefully interfered with their electromagnetic propulsion, which is generally, even back in 47, they were already talking about magnetism and as far as anti-gravity, that type of thing.
For sure.
So I'm more intrigued with that at the moment because that's something that we can scientifically look into. We can acquire that data. We can look at, those radar, the power of the radar at those respective locations back at that time. And let's take it into a lab and let's see what effect it might have. Let's see if it causes, metal to shake or gyrate or, have some ill effect as far as that's something within its proximity. And I guess that's where, especially with Dr. Hynek, where it was always the nuts and bolts. Like we want to go across the street and kick the tires, that type of thing. So we're way beyond theory and opinion as much as, okay, we have all the sworn affidavits, we have all the video depositions, we have more and more of the deathbed confessions, all admissible in a court of law. So now, as we've also had the 5 archaeological digs at the debris field. So we're still looking for the hardware. We're still looking for the holy grail, so to speak. I want to hold it in my hands. I'm 99.9% convinced it happened, as all the eyewitnesses described it. That remaining 0.1% is, I want to hold it. I want to see for myself. And then mission accomplished.
Now, what about, so are you moving away from being struck by lightning?
Not necessarily, because that too.
Right.
That we can document. There indeed was
a bad storm. It was a bad storm.
A bad storm. And the fact that the ranchers who we interviewed, they all talked about what sounded like an explosion between the thunderclaps. That something sounded different, something unusual. And because this is high desert, there are no buildings, no obstacles really of any sort. So if you're one of the livestock, you're the tallest thing standing out there. That's and so true. the ranchers were always concerned about downed livestock, struck by lightning, that type of thing. And we've been out there ourselves where a storm would come up very abruptly and the lightning is flashing all around you and realizing, hey, we're a lightning rod racing out of the area. And you see it would strike the ground and the hillside would, immediately engulf in flames, the dry desert, conditions. And it really gave you a firsthand impression of what we're talking about, that the lightning indeed can be very wicked because you're almost halfway up there to greet it, so to speak.
Now, and staying on this before we move on, one of the easy outs for critics and debunkers of Roswell or any alien visitation, I might add, is that, okay, so they've got the technology to go interstellar, travel across the universe, and they get here, and then they just crash.
I know.
Yeah, what's your response to that?
Well, okay, what if they are totally unfamiliar with storms, thunder, lightning? They don't have such conditions where they happen to be. And one of the giveaways of such a critical remark as far as on their part would be the fact that Marcel, again, the first military officer, along with Cavett, to arrive at the site, he said the first thing they did was they checked for radiation, and it was negligible. It was strictly background. So to me, that immediately would suggest that this is an atmospheric craft. It's not something that has, entered through our, traveled through our radiation belt and then come through our atmosphere. And as we experience as far as with the shuttle and, our own rockets that transcend as far as our atmosphere and how everything is radioactive and has to be scrubbed down. Even the astronauts, they go into as far as a state of sequester and being contained
decontamination.
Decontamination. Right. And so because there was no radiation, again, this was something most likely launched by something else, a mothership, Starship Enterprise, to use that example. And it may explain why it also was described as not having any moving parts, that there wasn't an engine, there wasn't any form of propulsion, that it was something that within our own atmosphere, whether it was anti-gravity, electromagnetic, that it essentially would push off of the electric molecules within our own atmosphere. I know that was a theory that they were even banishing about even back then. So again, if I have to look at what the eyewitnesses have described. And Marcel, given he's the first to arrive on the scene, and he's no stranger to crash investigations. He's no stranger to materials and how they react and how they behave under certain conditions, certain circumstances. And they were befuddled. They were at, Marcel even described how they tried to reassemble some of the pieces. And I guess you first would have to know what the shape was. And I don't believe they were able to, discern that as well, that they had no idea what the original shape of the craft was.
Jesse Marcel Jr. said once, and I love this quote from him, but it's about as honest as it gets. He goes, "Why would my dad wake us up to show us balloon stuff?"
Precisely. 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. It's like the perfect quote, man. It's the perfect quote.
Jess Jr. was their only child. And his father, Major Marcel, would occasionally discuss with him. And Jess Jr. would tell us that at one point he even did a sketch of Fat Man for him, told him about the new bomb, but that he couldn't say a word about this, otherwise he'd get his dad in a lot of trouble. And then he tore up, and then he used his lighter and he burned up, the sketch, the drawing. So that's how close they were. And he wanted his son, I think more than his wife, he wanted Jess Jr. to see this before he would then drive on and report back to the base with his with his bounty, with the wreckage that he had accumulated that very day. And taking Jess Jr. at 2 o'clock in the morning, as well as, his wife, out to the kitchen. And there he has this debris scattered on the kitchen floor, on the kitchen table. Back in May of 1991, we had Dr. John Watkins, who was professor emeritus at the University of Montana at Missoula. He was the one who got the Hillside Strangler to confess under hypnosis. So we went right to the top. And we had him take Jess Jr. back to that early morning. We had him relive that experience. And he went through it all in the first hand. And he was repeating over and over again what his father was saying as they are examining this wreckage. And it was always pieces of a flying saucer. No question, no deviation from that. We are handling pieces of a flying saucer. And so that there again, that's the science of, okay, how can we fine tune this? How do we go back and relive this? And are we then able to sharpen the memory? And Jess Jr. was then able to sketch under hypnosis the symbols, the symbology that he saw on these I-beam structures. That's where that all originally came from. That was through hypnosis. And then we had other witnesses that, because we retained that as a control sample, and then others matched and came up with similar shapes as to what they observed on the wreckage. And I think in practicing not only scientific methodology, but just always reverting back to what would Dr. Hynek do in this situation? Where would he go? What expertise would he rely on? And I think that there too, Jimmy, we've always gone to the best we could find, whether it was professional scientific hypnotists or metallurgists or crash investigators. We spent a lot of time going through engineers at Boeing, even NASA. Is that, how can you explain this? How can you explain an eyewitness describing it this way? Even psychologists, Jimmy, where we had this wonderful situation that was described to us that prior to the incident, there was almost this family relationship between the military and the townspeople of Roswell. Not only how proud they were of these heroes from World War II, living right there within their midst, but the fact that they shopped together. They would go. It's
a military community.
Precisely.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And how this was all destroyed after the incident. How it was crashed. It was, all torn asunder. That there was this level of distrust, a total breakdown. And so I then started to pose the question: could a balloon do that? Could even a mistaken balloon explanation create that type of a rift between almost a family unit, as it was described to us over and over again? And I finally concluded that these men were heroes of World War II. It would take something as big or even bigger than that to tear that apart.
Right.
And to me, that too suggested something much more extraordinary.
It's not worth it. It's not worth it to destroy a community over a weather balloon.
Over a balloon.
A disinformation campaign.
Exactly.
Okay, so now everybody, we're going to run without commercials tonight. We're just going to go straight through. Don, let me ask you this. Okay. The debris field is on the Brazel Ranch.
Foster Ranch. Yeah.
A Foster Ranch.
Yeah, Foster,
and oversaw by...
He was the foreman. Brazel was the foreman.
By Brazel. Okay, so that's the debris field. The main crash site was at another location.
Correct.
But that's not my question. We'll come back to that. Okay. So that would indicate to me additional flights and additional trucks. Some stuff made it to Washington. Yes. There's a stopover in Fort Worth. The final destination for most of this stuff is Wright Field, Wright-Patterson.
Correct, in Dayton, Ohio.
In Dayton, Ohio. So would the big main part of the craft that was still intact, is that trucked? Or it's too big to fit on a plane. So how did that get to? And do you feel that everything today, or most of it, is still at Wright Field?
The final impact, the pod, the capsule, what was left of the internal cabin, was only about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was egg-shaped. That's how it was always described to us, that it was like a small car. And so it would have fit inside the bomb bay of a B-29. You would have.
Okay, so you think it was flown? It was trucked.
It was trucked on a lowboy, a flatbed. We have a half a dozen witnesses who described it coming right down Main Street, Roswell. Even the two paper boys. You had two newspapers at that time, the Daily Record and the Dispatch, and they both worked opposite sides of the street. And then they both described to us as adults how they watched this convoy of this heavy guarded as far as flatbed truck and something under a tarp, round that, just was, wide enough to fit as far as on that flatbed. And they described how they watched it. They approached 2nd Street and then they turned to the left, to the east. And they would get out of their trucks and they would hold the stoplight cables up so the truck could pass underneath. And then they turned on to Alexander because we have witnesses in Alexander. One of them was even a roofer, and he heard the loud roar of vehicles. And then from atop one of the homes he was working on, and he saw the convoy pass by. And from there, they went to the east side of the base where they could avoid the front gate, the base proper. They could drive through the east gate, cross the tarmac, and directly to the B-29 hangar P3, Building 84 as it's known today. And this is where all the wreckage, the remains of that pod, and the bodies were stored before being shipped out.
I'm going to sort of change the subject. We're staying on the subject. When David Grush made his statements at the congressional hearing a few months ago, when he stated, now quite famously, that we have craft, we're reverse engineering them, and we also have the biologics, we have the pilots of
Right.
these craft. He didn't mention Roswell by name, but do you think that was one of the cases that he was referring to?
Yes, because if you would go back to the original interview, the original first time that he was interviewed by Ross Coulthart, and he did specifically describe Roswell. He mentioned Roswell by name, and he described the characteristics of the wreckage, and he emphasized that the balloon explanation was indeed a hoax. It was a cover-up.
So, and now I don't want to publicize anything or market anything, but Lou Elizondo's book is now out, and he has dropped Roswell into the book and has also mentioned it in a couple of interviews of late. Do you think that somebody like him that is out in the public has direct knowledge of Roswell, or do you think that he's getting this stuff secondhand?
Well, I know
the same thing with David Grush or anybody else that would be talking about Roswell that is part of the DOD.
Just addressing a Grush for a moment. He's not a whistleblower by the true definition of that very word. He's not firsthand. A whistleblower is someone who can essentially prove what he is, breaking security. He is granted immunity, and he squeals. He talks. David Grush is not. He is repeating what he has been told by others. Lou as well, because in his book he cites that it is Dr. Hal Puthoff who told him specific details about Roswell. Last time I was with Lou was in Washington, and this was some months ago, where he told me, he said, when my book comes out, Don, you're going to be vindicated. You're going to, it's going to prove once and for all that Roswell indeed did happen. Well, again, he's repeating what he heard secondhand. So I'm disappointed in that regard. I hope it's not a case of where just because he makes such a proclamation that is enough. I'm sorry, for me it's not, because we're still trying to find the Holy Grail. So Lou, if you know anything, direct me, tell me who I can go to, because I've also talked to David Grush about this, and for a number of years now, every time I would bring this up to Lou, it was like, don't ask me anything but Roswell. Now, but what I'm especially intrigued with is the fact that, as you know, Jimmy, his book was delayed for the simple explanation that, well, it had to be cleared. And as I always remind people, that in Lou's capacity and his background, especially in intelligence, he's still connected. He's still on a short leash. And so I'm just repeating his very claim that everything that is in his book, Eminent, was cleared. That the Pentagon had to clear every word in that book. And what I, again, I'm amused by is the fact that no one has, gone more out of their way to explain away Roswell than the military, than the Air Force.
Don't you find that interesting?
And the idea, this is my take, whether it's Lou or Grush or Hal Puthoff, for example, anybody out there that wants to act like they are the gatekeepers of the secrets, right? And they want to hide behind some document or the threat of prison time. Nobody, I'm going to go on the record, Don, right now. Okay? Nobody is going to prison for ET revelations. It ain't going to happen.
I couldn't agree more.
It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen.
I couldn't agree more. Jimmy,
you could have no, because that confirms
precisely
the lie.
Precisely. And in fact, when our first 10 witnesses were alive, that was the very argument we would use with them. Let's call their bluff. Let's, dare them to, demonstrate any repercussions or reprisal or, the threat of placing you under arrest for, coming up with an explanation different than their weather balloon nonsense. And that's their catch-22. The fact that they can't push back. I mean, they can say within their own confines, well, we don't have any physical evidence. We can't find any documentation. But that gets them off. As far as
100%. Look, you come up with documents, photographs, a reel of film, and you pop it all out and you lay it out, and you are a whistleblower, right? ET interviews, friggin' J-Rod eating a pudding cup, it's all on the table, right? It's all there.
Correct.
Truman hanging out in the cafeteria with a couple of ETs. All of this is just revealed. You're not going to prison. You are not. There is no way. How is that possible? You're not going to be speared away. You're not going to be disappeared. You're not going to be suicided. It's that simple. You can't hide behind an NDA. You just can't. Nobody's going to go to prison for that. All right. So let me see here. I think we've lost Don again. So let me, Don, I'm going to reset you. Don keeps stepping on cables. Yeah, nobody. Don, are you back? Oh, he was back for a second. You're not. The government, in order to, is going to have to say, Don, the government would have to say that the film is legit, the documents are legit, you are leaking. What could be top secret about ET being real? Nothing.
Nothing. And that's where I still question, as far as in Lou Elizondo's case, that he comes right out and states in his book that Roswell happened, down to the number of bodies, down to the circumstances of the crash. And yet, it's all under this umbrella that everything was cleared. Everything was cleared for publication. And so for me, that's the disconnect. But then I have to also mention that for all of these years, we've always been told that there's a growing faction within the military that truly wants this all to come out, that they feel they have been just as deprived as anyone, especially here as far as those of us on the civilian front. And I just imagine I would talk to officers and they would even lament the fact that the old order did not pass down any of the big, deep, dark secrets that they felt that they served as heirs to, that they, the gauntlet would be passed and okay, now it's your job, keep it suppressed, keep things, a tight lid on everything, or follow up on this, flesh this out, investigate this. But no, they were essentially, cut out of the picture. And I guess if I were a high-ranking officer at the Pentagon, I'd be more curious than ever. I'd be asking questions, and I'd be looking for my own whistleblowers, because it's one thing to be always use the excuse, well, I'm just following orders. Well, yeah, a lot of the personnel at Roswell were just following orders. You know, they were threatening civilians and they were threatening children. We were just following orders. Well, how far did that get at Nuremberg? I mean, I'm sorry. That's where you put your foot down. You say, I don't cross that line. And those are the whistleblowers that need to come forward, that we were ordered to, essentially, threaten a civilian into submission to prevent them from ever speaking out. That's the type of whistleblower I would love to see, that we strong-armed a civilian over nothing. Over nothing.
Yeah. And see, I think the point really needs to be made here, in that if you come forward with something like this, that the government for so many decades said, denied, and called us crazy and everything else, then therefore we can say whatever we want and we can prove whatever we want, because you have said in the past that it doesn't exist. So where are the laws against that? Right? Is it satire or not? Right?
Well, right. Yeah. Is it as Hynek back at that time, they called it the silly season, that whenever things like this, the summer of 47, and just all the flying saucer, the flying discs reports at that time, and that this was a passing fad. The thought was that, something would come up that fall and would replace, all this nonsense. But as we all know, it didn't. It just became even more and more bold and more progressive, to the point that within 5 years they were buzzing the White House, as they did in 52, that type of thing. And then they're abducting, people, and then we're having, multitudes of people that see things over Phoenix, Arizona. And then with that lingering rumor in the background, well, but they actually have physical proof. They have physical evidence. They actually have bodies on ice someplace, that type of thing. And these stories keep, regurgitating from different sources. And as we now are more and more reliant on secondhand testimony, the families. Any lawyer would tell you, when the secondhand testimony corroborates the first, it solidifies the first. And so that's where I'm not dismayed, even with the notion that now we're tracking down the families. We're getting the deathbed testimonies. Had one just the other day, once again, that my dad told me that there were even Germans. There were men who were speaking German out at the base during this. Well, we already had confirmed that paperclip, that they brought in a number of the paperclip scientists to look at the wreckage. Why, at a time when this would have been probably the most controversial move on the part of the United States government, that it would have been exposed that we brought all those Nazi scientists here to the United States. We kept them at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. And this was a secret for the next 40 years. And that they would risk bringing these scientists into Roswell to look at balloon remnants. Again, I'm sorry. The onus is on you to prove the balloon, because we continue to demonstrate that no matter the witnesses, no matter who we speak to, they swear to their deathbeds that this was a craft of unknown origin.
There's such a new wave of interest into the UFO subject that is risen since 2017, and we all know the reasons why.
Yes,
most that are here, they don't know the history, which is fine. I mean, look, learn. Come on in. We'll help you out here.
Exactly.
But there is a lot of history, and if you think that we're going through drama today, take a look at the past.
Don and I have gone like this
Yes.
every couple of years
Yes.
over some of the craziest big, and if we go back, and this is my point, and everybody here listening that is new to the subject, you think you have an opinion, go and do some basic research on these 2 points.
Couldn't agree more.
Mid 1990s, 2 reports come out. 2 on Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was from the General Accounting Office, the
Correct.
frigging GAO.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, as far as an agency goes, the GAO is like the scariest thing ever. Okay, they don't play. General Accounting Office. And then we had the Air Force report come out called Roswell Case Closed.
Correct.
In the GAO version of the report, they stated, now remember, they asked for receipts, you give up the receipts. That's to the General Accounting Office. And they found that all records,
Yes.
all of it pertaining to Roswell were destroyed.
Destroyed.
Inventory, warehousing, logistics, phone records, anything written, everything about Roswell had been destroyed
During that very time.
And I find that suspect beyond words, right?
Of course.
And then, so that's a lie, right? That's one lie. And then the other lie came from the Air Force. And this is basic fundamental stuff. And I remember when I read this, I was pulling out of my office in Culver City, and this finally comes out. I've got the report, and I'm sitting in my car, and I'm reading it. And I went, well, this is bullshit, because they bring up the crash test dummies.
Correct.
And anybody that knew anything about ufology and that case and mogul and everything else that was going on back then, you knew the dates of everything. And I knew that was 1954. That wasn't 1947. And that is a lie by the air. They can't even get their story straight.
Correct.
So here we are today in 2024, going into 2025. These basic facts now are going to bubble to the surface. And I think that our elected officials and leaders have an interest in this subject. This isn't the old guard.
No,
right?
Because we have been deceived. We have been lied to. When we, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the program, when we were working with the late Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, and for all of his failed efforts to get anyone to even, push for congressional hearings on Roswell, and we were meeting with him at his office in Washington, as well as in Albuquerque. I would speak to him over the phone, and we were providing him with much of our own research data. And I remember his frustration. He had sent 3 separate letters to then Secretary of Defense Les Aspin. Now, you're a senior congressman. You're on the Defense Appropriations, Committee, and you can't even get the Secretary of Defense to even respond to you, because all you're asking for is a cursory response, an examination as to the file on this one incident in 1947. And they're turning a blind eye to it. So that's when he enlisted. He got the GAO, as you mentioned, Jimmy, to look into this. Well, but this was all with the assurance, though, from the Air Force that should they find anything on the case, that it would be sent immediately to his attention. Well, as Newsweek magazine very aptly put it, it was as though it was a preemptive strike, because it was in September of 1994 that it was Colonel Richard Weaver at the Pentagon, and they acknowledged, he admitted that they had lied. He used that word, the Air Force, the Army Air Corps, they lied about the balloon explanation back in 1947, and they presented their new theory, which was Project Mogul. Same balloon, but that it was part of a Russian spy program with an acoustic sonobuoy, a listening device, that in the anticipation of when the Soviet Union would detonate the first atomic bomb, which would not be until August of 1949, that we would pick up the shock wave in the upper atmosphere. There isn't anyone watching tonight that can place a mogul balloon on that ranch back in 1947. No one living. No documentation. In fact, the very flight number that the Air Force cited, flight number 4, was scrubbed. It's right within their own logbook that there was a heavy overcast. They jettisoned the balloon, but the radar array trains were never connected. So how could there then be wreckage that could be attributed to a flying saucer? So again, you can prove it with their own documents. And then the GAO came out with the Air Force's report was over 700 pages.
Yes, it was.
Whereas the GAO's report was only 27.
That's right.
Because everybody pled ignorance. We can't find anything. And then the explanation from the Air Force that all the files had been conveniently expunged. They had all been destroyed.
All records. Everything.
Of the first atomic bomb squadron in the world, no less.
Right.
And then they came out with the crash dummies in May of 1997, just before the 50th anniversary. And this would have pertained to Project Excelsior and Project High Dive. And you're talking about 6 foot tall, anthropomorphic, plastic, metal, wooden crash dummies wearing jumpsuits and harnesses and parachutes. And as you mentioned, Jimmy, it was years later. And that the Air Force came out with their new medical malady that you will not find in a single medical journal anywhere, called time compression. That not only as we get older do we start to confuse the years, but we also start to confuse the decades. Again, no such condition exists. And then when we sent an immediate statement to the Pentagon, we reminded them, need we tell you that all of our first-hand witnesses to the bodies were no longer in Roswell or no longer in New Mexico during that time? So how do you explain that? Well, they didn't. Because you might remember that it was a Pentagon spokesperson who was then asked by the media, and some of them did really catch up. You know, they figured out what was going on. Time compression, what are you talking about? There's no such thing. And then the spokesperson was asked, well, what if the public doesn't accept this explanation? The response was then, well, then I guess we'll be back in another few years offering another one. So it clearly became a case of running out the clock. We're stalling for time until those last first-hand are gone, and then it's cover-up complete. So you have to historically look at their agenda, look at their motives, and look at the reasons behind them, you know, essentially covering this up now, going on almost 80 years. That's where the new students of the subject, they need to study the history, because we are where we are today due to where we were back then. And I sit back and I'm so often amused. Why do we trust them? Why do we expect the very arbiters of the cover-up to ever roll over and say, we're sorry, here are the faxes, you know, we've accumulated them over 80 years. They're not going to do it.
What do you think? It's okay to just stretch your mind a little bit here. What do you think the government is in possession of, aside from the craft itself? Did film, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Photographs, and
for example, Roswell. We not only were able to determine who the videographers, the ones who filmed at the site, but then also the photographers. You had the third photo lab who was stationed at Roswell at that time, and we tracked down as many of them as we could. And each one of them described to us that they were completely deprived. They were shut out of filming any aspect of the recovery, of the retrieval operation. That all these outside photographers came in and filmed and photographed every minute of this operation. And so one can only imagine just on film alone what they have in their possession. And we have occasionally had eyewitnesses through the years who have described to us that they saw film or they saw stills, and their descriptions were precisely as eyewitnesses, describing the pod, the bodies, that type of thing. And so, granted, they couldn't provide us with, any as far as copies of said film, that type of thing. But nonetheless, their descriptions were quite accurate.
Do you think if things keep going the way they are, and we've been hoping for this forever, so I don't know if this year is going to be any different than the years past. It feels different. It feels a little bit more tangible than it has in the past. But if this does continue to unravel and reveal itself, is it possible that we could go back further in time than 2017 and get this Roswell stuff out and make it public?
We have to. And that's why I was originally, when they were talking about only going back to 2004, when the project with ATIP, as far as with Senator Harry Reid and the $22 million that was allocated, that was that project that Lou Elizondo oversaw. But that they now are going back to 47 and even a little earlier. And to me, the reason that is so important is that back then, jet propulsion, rockets were just getting started. The skies were essentially clear. There were few other options as to what technology, what form of aircraft we were dealing with. We certainly didn't have drones. There were no satellites orbiting the planet back then. Everything was still quite pristine, very virgin, as the modern age of ufology would define it. And as a result, I think that's where we have some of the best cases, the best examples. And just imagine when the military was actually investigating the phenomenon. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, and the fact that there were even other agencies, other branches of the military that with even higher clearances that were investigating the phenomena. We would love to see, like Blue Book, for example, when it was declassified, it mentions 21 gun camera cases. 21. We talk about as far as the Tic Tac and as far as with the Nimitz and the gun camera footage, but this is 21. And yet none of those films, none of those stills have ever been released. Now, wouldn't we love to see them? Not just one example, but 21 of them that they acknowledge. And so there's just a wealth, a mountain of evidence that presently exists.
When did you start working for Hynek?
78, right out of college. So,
okay,
yes.
So 78. So let's talk about Hynek for a second.
Certainly.
Because that's 78 is a good year to discuss. And I'll tell you why. We talk about the cover-up, right? And how complete it was.
Mm-hmm.
Roswell was not in Blue Book. We know that.
One little clipping.
One
little newspaper. That's all there is.
So did you and Hynek ever discuss Roswell in any capacity before 1980?
It was just prior to my meeting and then working with Dr. Hynek that the late Leonard Stringfield had that famous presentation at the Mutual UFO Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, where he described for the first time these crash retrieval cases. And Hynek could not have been more fixated on getting Len to share his information, to provide him with names that he could then follow up, that he could interview these people, and then he could go back to the Air Force and now tell me about this particular incident. Tell me about this case. Tell me about this recovery operation. Well, Len never did. Len, just flatly, he honored his promise of confidentiality to all of his eyewitnesses, to all of his whistleblowers. and he never shared anything with Alan. He eventually would share things with Kevin Randall and myself, and there had even been a promise at one time that he was going to turn his files over to us, so then we could follow up, that we could continue his work. So Hynek was very intrigued with the very aspect that why are we out chasing lights in the sky and daylight discs when the physical evidence is available, when it's at hand, so to speak. So Jenny Zeidman was Dr. Hynek's private secretary. She worked at Battelle Institute just down the road from Wright Pat in Columbus, Ohio. And she was the one who would drive him back and forth each month when he was consulting with Project Blue Book. So they were at an awards ceremony one evening, and Jenny would tell the story that all at once, Alan, unbeknownst to a number of other people sitting at the table, he slides over a piece of paper. And Jenny takes it, and all it says is, "We got one." She immediately knew what he was referring to. We got one. So on the back of the note, she slid it back, and then she wrote, and she slid it over, and she asked, "Who told you this?" And then Alan quickly wrote and slid it back, and it was AF, the Air Force. The Air Force had told him this. Okay. So Hynek then became all the more committed that he was going to get answers. In fact, you maybe know the story, I maybe even mentioned on an earlier program, of when Dr. Hynek was in Washington. And it was the first time that Donald Rumsfeld served as Secretary of Defense, and that was with the Ford administration. And Rumsfeld was Hynek's original congressman in his district in Illinois. And so they knew one another. So Dr. Hynek arranged a meeting with Rumsfeld at his office in Washington, and Alan would tell us that he was sitting there, and he said to Rumsfeld, "I've given you 20 years of my life. I believe I deserve some answers. I believe I deserve to know the truth." And he described how Rumsfeld got up from behind his desk, walked over, leaned down on Dr. Hynek, pointed his finger in his face, and said, "You have no need to know." And that was the extent of it. So from there on, and all the time I was with Dr. Hynek, he always would make that comment, "I'm an old man in a hurry. I'm an old man in a hurry." I don't want to ever get to that point that I feel I'm in a hurry.
Right.
I feel I still have plenty of time, and I don't want to ever be there. But nonetheless, it wasn't until after J. Allen Hynek had passed away that we discovered notes, documents, papers that he had hidden, that he had saved for us to find posthumously. And when he had moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, after he had retired from Northwestern University, head of the astronomy department, they had willed him an observatory, an old observatory in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, in the western portion of the state. Well, he and Elaine Hendry at that time was the former wife of Alan Hendry, who was our chief investigator at CUFOS. And they would slip over and work on the observatory, where unbeknownst to the rest of us, he was slipping further east into Corona. He was speaking to the ranchers, the hired hands. He was interviewing the very people we eventually would also meet and talk with. And he was conducting his own independent investigation on Roswell. And at the top of the papers, he was writing, "This needs to be investigated." So,
yeah, I talked to Paul about this. When you go and read J. Allen Hynek's, he's written a few, but his two books that he wrote in the 70s, the report on Project Blue Book, right?
That UFO report, best evidence, and then the Hynek UFO report on Blue Book, right?
He is one pissed off dude, man.
Oh yes,
he is angry.
Even when they removed the tumor from his brain at the Moffitt Clinic up in the Bay Area. And Alan Hendry described to us that they observed him in the recovery room, and he was tossing and turning, and all he kept saying was, "Why can't they tell me? Why can't they tell me even now?" So they used him.
He was angry. He was angry, and the statements that he makes in the opening part of the book. Well, Paul has written a new forward,
right?
A new forward, but in the original book, Hynek says, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, and it's like history repeating itself. But he says, we need to get science involved with this subject.
Yes.
And it's exactly the same argument that we have today. Oh, I want to back up to Leonard Stringfield for a second.
Please.
Did you know? Okay. 1945. Army Air Force troop transport plane before World War II has ended is flying into the Pacific to an island near Japan. Okay. The airfield that they are landing on, newly developed radar stations are installed.
Right.
And they detect from multiple bases UFOs, objects in the sky. This is 1945. And the troops on the plane, including the pilot, and this is written up, this is a military report, look out the windows and they see three objects and flying around the plane, and they're white, they're balls of light. They're flying around the plane. The radar stations are guesstimating around 2,000 miles per hour.
My God, that's almost Mach 3.
Yeah, 3. This is 1945. One of the troops on that plane, Private Leonard Stringfield.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. And you're absolutely correct, Jimmy. Len described to us that he was a gunner on one of the ships. And he described to us how there was a kamikaze, a Japanese fighter that was coming in, and that he was firing for all it was worth, trying to blast it out of the sky before it impacted. And Len actually would become emotional as he would describe such things, as so many of the World War II generation. You know, they never forgot such things. So that too was something. And again, the irony that Len couldn't look back. He saw this firsthand, and he realized that this, surpassed anything we had in the sky at that time. The descriptions like the Foo Fighters back in the latter stages of the war, that we thought they were German, the Germans thought they were ours, the Russians thought they were, and on and on and on. But nonetheless, nobody was able ever to account for who was responsible for these orbs of light, these plasmas, these unknowns that clearly could outmaneuver anything we had in the sky at that time. So I think you make an excellent point in that so many of our heroes, so many of the people that we then looked up to and we were motivated, we were inspired by, they had experiences.
Yep.
It wasn't that they just set out to make this a hobby. No, they set out to also prove something that they could, they could re-envision. It was there, but they couldn't prove it. So that became their life's mission. I'm going to.
That's why I'm here.
Right.
That's exactly why I'm here. And I understand the need and the necessity for a certain type and style of disclosure for people that have gone through what they've gone through. They need that for their family, for their bosses, for their husbands, for their kids, so they can go, look, this has been announced, from the Oval Office. All right. I understand that. I totally get that.
Yes.
All right. But I don't necessarily need, I enjoy, but I don't need somebody's book. I don't need somebody's opinion. I don't need somebody, a talking head on Fox News.
that doesn't change my experience.
Agreed.
And it forces my journey, like it did for Leonard Stringfield.
Yes.
You know, and that do I have the answers? No, I don't. I know what I've seen in the sky. I can't explain it, but it's not what they are telling me it is. Right? It's that simple.
School never lets out. The moment we think we have all the answers, there's only one direction left. And I fully anticipate that my last day will be my last breath. And I'll be able to look back and say not only that I've had a hell of a great time, but I could not, and I know you feel the same way, Jimmy, we couldn't be involved in a greater, profession, a greater topic of adventure and intrigue, and just chasing this elusive phantom. And we have no idea where it's going to lead us. And at some point, it's going to turn and stare us in the eye. And then I'd like to believe that we'll be ready, that we're not going to turn and run. I'm afraid too many would like to believe that this is something malevolent, that this is something threatening. That's the reason behind this cover-up. No, I still maintain it's a cover-up of ignorance, that the powers that be, they still don't have any answers. They're just as, bollocks. They're still just as much in the dark as we all are. So what do they disclose? Yeah, they can acknowledge the phenomenon is real. It's there, but we still don't know from where, from why, or from who. And as a result, because we can't bridge the technology, we're still flying jets. We're still flying rockets. We don't have spaceships. We haven't been to the moon in 50 years, my God. Mm-hmm. And I know that's another subject as far as whether the space program has continued unabated, and I'm willing to go there. But nonetheless, it's just a continuing example of how often we have been deceived. How this whole cloak and dagger, this whole idea that, well, we're going to spoon feed you what we want you to believe, but don't ever pull back the curtain. Well, you and I and so many of our colleagues, we're always pulling back that curtain because we can handle it.
Well, and I think that the establishment, and the establishment includes governments, religions, and schools, mm-hmm. and publishing and the media, right? The establishment, right?
Yes.
That has always been under somebody else's control and
Agreed.
Not ours.
Agreed.
Right? So what they wanted us to know, whether it was religion or mathematics or science or health or food or military, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what they were always able to control the distribution methods of knowledge. Right. Yes. And that's it. That is clearly not in their control now. This is a different world that we live in, and this world has gotten acclimated very quickly, hasn't it? In the thirst for knowledge, because we have access to everything now.
We do. But that's where we have to be all the more cautious that so much of social media and so much of, again, Stanton Friedman would call me constantly because he was so concerned about the entry of Roswell on Wikipedia was 100% government. And each and every time we tried to insert our position, the opposing viewpoint, within 24 hours, it would be taken down.
Removed.
So who's doing that? So again, who's controlling the access to the data? Who's controlling the data that is being provided? And so that's where I love the fact that we tend to control our own destinies. We are the ones who are out looking under each rock, looking for that evidence. We're not relying on unreliable sources who, I at times I have trusted and gone off in the wrong direction, but it becomes a big distraction. But again, because of one's foundation, because of one's grounding, you're able to regroup, you're able to steer back. And as long as, even as you go in a linear line towards that truth, it's going to go circular. You're going to go left, right, up and down. But as long as it moves forward, you're still making progress.
Right.
And that's why we are where we are today.
Isn't it amazing that you start to develop sources and relationships, and then you're fed information? And I know that this has happened to you multiple times. It's happened to me. It happened to me today, where you're told stuff from people that also know each other.
Yes.
And it's different. Some of it is 180 degrees different. Some of it's 5 degrees off, but it's not that they're not reading from the same page. And I think that if you reveal, let's say you have A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? Mm-hmm. But it's all different. And you go public with source B.
Right.
Now they know, because it's all different. Mm-hmm. They know who you're talking to and what information you're willing to share publicly. You then become a tool.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Isn't that fascinating? And
it is. And at the expense, we've had colleagues, we've seen people in the past who essentially have sold their soul by allowing themselves to be manipulated, to serve as a conduit, too often for disinformation, misinformation, and as a result, at what cost? And that's where the more of your historic background, and when I say historic background, then the more history that you know that you can rely on, and then you have a greater sense as to who the players are, what traits specific people then portray, that you recognize as sending up.
Oh, we lost you again right at the end of the show. Okay, Don, I'm pulling you out, and get back in here as soon as you can. Okay, Don, get back in here as soon as you can. Just when it's getting heated. See, this is the man running interference right there. Right when it's getting good. But it's so true, though. The sources that are out there feeding. Let me tell you something. There is so many podcasts right now, so many social media accounts on different social media platforms that are revealing this, and I've got this source, and I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got this. I've been through all of that, right? And I see these different social media accounts posting this information, and I'm just like, man, I know exactly what's going on here, and absolutely playing and using and these. I'm going to say innocent. Some of them are innocent. They want those likes. They want those clicks.
Yes.
They want those comments. They want their third. They want to be relevant. I'm way beyond all of that. I could give a rat's ass.
Yes.
Right.
Especially those who feel they have to control the narrative, that they have to be the authority. Well, it's one thing when you walk the walk. It's one thing when you actually do all the omen effort to, become a so-called expert. Well, first of all, how can you become an expert on UFOs when we don't have any answers? You may be an expert on the cases. You may be an expert on a particular event, that type of thing. But how can you be an expert on something that still remains unidentified? Okay, fine. But if it's in seeking glory and notoriety, fame and fortune, okay, fine. But then we see you for who you are. But if you still get the job done, that's why I have always maintained, I don't care who solves this riddle. I don't care who finally finishes the race. I just still want to be on the track.
That's
I
right.
want to be there. I want to be there because we all win. Whoever finally breaks this, we all win. How do you lose?
What's that famous quote from Churchill? Don't throw rocks at your detractors. It'll delay you on your journey.
Yes.
Right? It's something like that. I'm paraphrasing. But
that is basically it. And we all have detractors. We all have people. And that appears to be, their very goal, to distract us, to slow us down. And I remind people all the time, never empower anyone else to have control over you. And that's precisely what we then enable them to do. That once we allow them to ruffle us, or if we're so thin-skinned that they get under our very hide as far as in serving as that distraction, they've won.
They've won.
And we can't let them, we can't ever. I saw that with again, Hynek, and especially after his debate with astronomer Carl Sagan. And Alan and Dr. Hynek was so nervous. He was like Barney Fife, shaking with his paper as he stood up to the podium. And it was, I couldn't believe, why are you so nervous? Why are you so afraid? But because Sagan was the consummate showman. He was one of the number one guests with Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. In fact, there was an ongoing joke that when Carson retired, that Sagan was going to be his heir apparent. He was going to take over. But Sagan would come out after, Hynek's paper, and he would take the microphone and he would lean over the front of the podium, and it became shtick. He was the master of his own domain at that point. Well, that only made Hynek even more. It gave him even more of a complex. As much as we tried to, raise him up and don't worry what he still would constantly. What will Carl say? What will Carl say?
Right.
And I hated that. I hated that we failed in making him. Don't mind what Carl says, because Carl's not trying to find the truth. Carl is getting all the government grants. He's getting all the special funding. He's become a government hack. He's a useful tool. He has sold his soul. You haven't. Be proud of that. That we're scraping by, we're getting by on a shoestring, and yet we're still accomplishing everything that we have. And believe me, if he were on the show tonight with us, I would be, again, telling him, as his wife Mimi, when we had the first archaeological dig at the Roswell debris field. And all she kept saying to us was, Alan would be so proud of you boys. Alan would be so proud of you boys. And Jimmy, I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't think, what would Alan say? What would he do in this situation? And so, yes, I'm still striving to make Alan proud, because we're going to finish what he started.
Well, he was so important in what was happening at that time, not only with Blue Book, but the other researchers that you brought up, Jacques Vallée. That's a really good example right there. And he was so important in that. And I just think that in the end, and I don't want to do this, and I know you don't want to do this either, but he had to. In the end, he had to just kind of look back and go, shit, I might have done it differently. And I don't want to, that's what we learn from with a guy like J. Allen Hynek. And in that, you know what? I just do what I do.
See, contrary to the History Channel series, Project Blue Book, they created the impression that Dr. Hynek was actually out in the field investigating these case reports, when they kept him under lock and key. Yep. They prevented him.
Do you remember when that one episode where he goes in the underground laboratory of the German paperclip scientists, and they have the aliens in the tubes, right? In the tanks.
Pure fiction.
Dude, I called Paul.
Yeah.
Right? I called Paul. I go, dude, are you? Man, it is what it is. It's just. And
fiction,
but the public sees that,
Mhm.
and they are assuming wasn't he in the plane that got shot down?
Right. Investigating the Thomas Mantell case from January, that type of thing. But again, the true scientist that he was, they could not afford having a scientist second guess their opinions, their investigations. And they were, again, cursory at best. They would allow Hynek to examine their case reports each time he would come down the right path where Blue Book was headquartered. And what they did not anticipate was the fact that during his time away from Blue Book, he was speaking to more and more military as well as commercial pilots. And they were describing to him some of the most profound cases. And he would go down to Blue Book and, well, where's the case involving this pilot? Or, none of that was ever there. It was all the, as Hynek would say, all the hardcore cases were going directly to Washington. We're going directly to the Pentagon. So then he quickly realized he did not have access to the best cases. So he became very frustrated, very bitter about that arrangement. So it was a deal with the devil. And he lived to regret it.
What was Mimi like? I asked Paul. I said, "So, dude, your mom had an affair with a Russian agent, right?" And Paul laughed, and I said, "What would your mom think about that?" And he goes, "She'd probably laugh." She was cool.
Yeah, because she was such a straight arrow, but she was his strength, and she was his sounding board. Like when we would do the Journal for UFO Studies with all the refereed science papers, she would edit and compile all of that information. As far as she did so much of the writing of the case reports, because Alan loved to be out in the field. He hated being behind a desk. He actually, once the Air Force turned him loose, he then realized it was in his power to finally go out and solve this riddle. And Mimi Hynek, she supported him 100%. Dr. J. Allen Hynek literally spent almost 100 days a year on the road. Mm-hmm. He literally was getting on a plane every 4 days. So what type of a wife would be patient and tolerant enough to even have that type of relation? But yet she did, because she realized he was in his element, that we used to joke about, that he got to go out and play cowboys and Indians. He got to do something that he truly loved. And but he ran out of time.
There's one last point, and then we'll say goodnight. But I want to end on this. I'm under the impression, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm right, I want to know why. I'm under the impression that Socorro really moved him.
Yes.
And it was that the one case that stood out amongst everything that he researched? Was it Zamora? Was it Socorro?
It was Socorro, April 1964. Blue Book would continue on for another 5.5 years, but Hynek was there. Hynek spoke to Lonnie Zamora. The dispatch, he spoke to other officers in the department who immediately arrived on the scene, other officers who saw the footprints, which were the size of a 10-year-old child at the landing site. Hynek would later describe that he went out of his way to try to prove that Socorro was a hoax, but he couldn't. And so that's where the 180-degree became complete. Mm-hmm. He made that full turnaround. And yet Hynek was the one, for example, when all the press accounts, all the photographs that were taken by the local media, even the police department, Hynek was the one who was ordered by the Air Force to go and confiscate all of them.
Now, so don't you find it suspect? And certainly Hynek. Oh, by the way, Jacques Vallée told me. Can you confirm this?
See if Jacques is telling me the truth. Jacques said he was with Hynek when the phone call came in about Socorro.
I believe that. Yes. Yeah. And I see no reason to doubt that.
He said
I've heard that as well. Yeah.
And Hynek flew out the next day.
Correct.
So, do you find it strange that in Socorro, which again, we're talking about remote. This is remote, everybody. This is not downtown Chicago, right? It's not even downtown Milwaukee, right?
No. And I've been to the site many times.
Now, do you find it strange that federal agencies are on the scene at the same time as the local police and the state highway?
The FBI is there. Holloman Air Force Base. They have set up as far as officers from the south, and there is a full-scale operation going on.
All there at the same time.
Correct.
Crazy.
And the idea that this would be described as a college prank on the part of the mining school south of Socorro at that time, or even Hector Quintanilla, who was the last director of Project Blue Book. Hynek once referred to me as a nasty officer. Quintanilla would call up like the Ohio police case, which involved their pursuit, which is even recreated in the Close Encounters movie, where they're chasing what appears to be a speeding vehicle. And then all at once it continues upward and the police cars go off the road. Well, Quintanilla would call up the police chief, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Tell me about the hallucination your men just had." That's how he was. Nasty officer. But yet Quintanilla himself stated that he too looked into every possible explanation for Socorro, and he could not explain it away. And that's from a die-hard debunker. Even in the Air Force report on Socorro, it refers to it as a vehicle that had landed. You go out to the site, and the cluster of stones that they used to mark where the landing gear had touched down are still there. And so you go back, and it becomes part of your UFO history. That's where, again, granted, it happened now 60 years ago. But to be at the actual location is like going to the Alamo for the first time.
Sure.
It's like you feel 100 ghosts in your presence.
Don Schmitt, you're the absolute very best, my brother. You got another book in you?
Well, I just finished another book, and this is with the assistance of 3 lawyers and a judge, where we demonstrate as far as all the violations of their First Amendment rights, due process, their civil rights. And then at the end of each chapter, I have 3 lawyers adding professional commentary, is how the government broke the law, how the government continuously broke the law regarding Roswell. I'm also teaching a course on Roswell at New Paradigm Institute, as far as at Ubiquity University, with Danny Sheehan and Richard Dolan. And so that's just starting. So your viewers can go online and check that out as well. So if they'd like to get into an actual class on Roswell, as we reinvestigate it, we go through the whole process, the methodology, and very interactive. And so Roswell is far from over, ladies and gentlemen.
It's the gift that keeps on giving, Don Schmitt. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. And
listen, I'm going to send you my address. I need that box of hair products. Don Schmitt, everybody. Thank you so much, Don. Be safe. Oh, everybody was asking. I didn't want to say they're trying to pin down your accent, and they were close. Everybody was saying Minnesota.
Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's close enough.
Next
Same
door.
thing. Same thing. Everything has gravy on it in Wisconsin, just like Minnesota. Don Schmitt, good night, my brother. Thank you so much. You're the best.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Don Schmitt. And that wraps, what a perfect night on the show. That wraps another week here on Fade to Black. I want to thank all of you. I now get my weekend started. So everybody be safe. Have a great, safe, fun, and an amazing weekend. And I'll see you right back here on Monday. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go back, Lee Tappy.